This is a $5,000 professional grade camera, and we will be doing a direct comparison with the iPhone 15 Pro, which stands at around a quarter of the price. The real question is though, is the iPhone 15 Pro good enough to shoot at such a level that you might not need to use a professional camera anymore? And this is what we will find out by the end of this comparison. Let the facts speak. Early note, all of these videos were shot in log format and were later color graded by our professional videographer. I don't know if you noticed, but in the intro, we constantly switch between footage from the iPhone 15 Pro and the Canon R5 with a Canon EF 24-105mm lens, so we're curious if you noticed any differences. Also, we shot everything at 24mm to match the iPhone's lens in this comparison. Let's start off with some daytime footage, with the iPhone 15 Pro being first in line. First impressions, it actually looks magnificent. Definitely not like it was shot with a mobile phone. I'm not biased, guys. I used Android phones my whole life, and it's just a reality when I say that iPhones shoot great videos, but the ProRes LOG mode pushes the boundaries even further, and the dynamic range we see is a testament to this. With the Canon R5, I do look a bit brighter and I am more visible, and this is due to mobile phones having to dim down the foreground a bit to be able to pull up the highlights in the sky. Of course, you can do much more in post-processing when it comes to a professional camera, but we will get there in a bit. Another neat change in the 15 Pro compared to the previous version is the lowered sharpness. No matter how much I loved iPhone videos, I equally had issues with the footage being too sharp for my taste, giving it that artificial look. Apple found the solution by pulling down the sharpness level slightly, giving users softer and more natural looking footage, which ended up being a net positive. Regardless, computational video still isn't at the same level as a professional camera and the push it gets from the superior hardware. The footage of the Canon R5 is pretty soft, which is apparent when we take a deeper look at my skin, but it should be said that the differences are getting more and more minuscule. While it was very easy to spot and differentiate between these videos in the past, I honestly can't say that the professional camera is much better than the iPhone while shooting in log format. One example I'd like to give is that when shooting indoors in decent lighting, the quality difference is minimized even more as you don't have extra pressure from factors such as direct sunlight and dynamic range requirements. Both of them look pretty good in my eyes, and the only way I can consistently go for the professional camera is when I start nitpicking and pixel peeping, and even then, remember how the iPhone 15 Pro is around $1,000, with this camera setup being 4 times or even more expensive depending on where you live. Like I previously mentioned, if you pay close attention, you can see how the phone footage is slightly sharper, while the camera footage is softer and the contrast alongside the saturation is just less aggressive. I'd still take the Canon R5 here, but it's just so close, I can't help but be amazed by the iPhone 15 Pro's performance. There's really nothing to complain about as you do your own color grading in this format anyway, but it's common knowledge that phones like this like to slightly amp up colors to make photos and videos more vivid, something that's not really seen with actual cameras. Whichever one you like is going to be left up to you. Switching back to some horizontal shots, I do notice something, but I'm not sure if you will as well. Since it's cloudy, there is less light, and the darker areas on the iPhone 15 Pro are slightly noisy and the detail isn't perfectly reflected in the scene. When we switch to the Canon R5, not really able to explain it, but you can also tell you just switched to a camera. And pay attention to the darker areas that I mentioned, gray colors in particular, and notice how those areas don't have noise like on the previous footage. This is perhaps the biggest difference between the two, as the hardware limitations can't be overcome with software updates. Yet. Regardless, when the colors in scene are brighter, the difference is minimal, and I believe that this is what we should focus on. Mobile phone videography has gotten to such a level, especially on iPhones, that when there is adequate lighting and minimum shadows, you can't really tell big differences between professional grade cameras and this small handheld device, and I want to capitalize on this point by giving you some more information about what I just talked about right when we're moving to night footage. Remember when I said there's one big thing that gives a professional camera advantage in terms of hardware, and that software isn't developed enough to close that gap? That big thing is a big, or rather, huge sensor. The Canon R5 is a full-frame camera. The iPhone 15 Pro, on the other hand, has the largest sensor out of all the iPhones ever released, yet this is the size of the sensor when compared to a full-frame one. There are some phones like the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, the Oppo Find X6 Pro, and the Vivo X90 Pro Plus that have 1-inch sensors, but even they can't compare with what the Canon is packing. The larger the sensor is, the more light that it can take in. This allows you to capture more information in your shots, have better performance in terms of dynamic range, as well as improve the performance of your device at night. You might not be able to see exactly what I'm talking about if you're watching this on a mobile phone, but even if you are, you should jam the brightness up all the way, and you might be able to spot quite a bit of noise on the iPhone's footage, especially around the shadows. With the amount of light the R5 takes in from all the sources around us, it's definitely not a surprise that even the dark areas of the video look pretty clear. Also, when the phone software determines that the scene is too dark, it can brighten up the footage automatically, which results in these two buildings next to each other being so bright that the footage is quite unappealing. Not to mention, the noise becomes even more visible in a bright environment. In situations like these, it's recommended to manually bring down the brightness, but even then, it won't have the same effect as shooting with a much larger sensor that can absorb the tiniest amount of light coming from whatever is around you and transform that into a much more stable video with minimal noise. I've always said in our camera comparisons that iPhones have historically had issues taking photos at night, but even then, that they were the phone that can take the best videos at night. The reason for this wasn't because their videos were great though, it was because mobile phones are generally just terrible to shoot videos with in low light conditions because of those hardware limitations that I mentioned. Regardless of how close the competition was during the day, the Canon R5 still remains king, and it will most likely stay this way until I'd say at least 5 to 10 years, until mobile phone manufacturers find a way to use software to emulate having a larger sensor, if they can of course. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed our comparison of the $5,000 Canon R5 complete with the lens and the iPhone 15 Pro, the phone that can do it all, at least in terms of videos. Do you agree with me that in the future, phones will shoot as well as professional cameras? Or do you think that this is just impossible because you just have to have the hardware handy? Leave a comment below and hit those like and subscribe buttons if you liked the video. I'll see you around.